Welcome to our next installment of chatting all things tech, AI, and people. Today, I'm joined by Steve Mast, who's co-founder of 2044 and, well, a world leader in AI readiness that we were just discussing, and also has a long career in the intersection of people, data, and all things tech. So thanks for coming along to have a chat today, Steve.
Thanks, Pete. I don't think anybody's ever introduced me as world leader, but I'll definitely add that to the LinkedIn profile for sure.
Yeah, great. You should own it. I think it suits. Well, the reason that we wanted to get you on for a chat today is because you're doing a lot of work with your team and have been for the last couple of years about all things people and in particular around AI readiness and looking at working with organizations to understand how ready they are to adopt AI, what are the barriers, how they're approaching it, and particularly with a focus on the people and how it's playing out for the people in those organizations. So to kick off, do you want to just give us a little bit of a highlight around what you're seeing out there right now when it comes to organizations and AI readiness, and what are some of the high level trends you're seeing?
Absolutely. So I think there's a few things going on right now. One, we're actually really seeing that this is not a technology problem. This is clearly becoming a people challenge, right? Like when I say people challenge, I really mean like a change management challenge. You know, the technology is quickly scaling past anything we've ever seen in history. Like it truly is, right? Did you know that OpenAI's ChatGPT, it crested over 2.5 billion prompts per day? So this isn't really a problem with the technology. Is quickly surpassing humans' capabilities. So the technology is zooming past. What really is the challenge is it's us, and it's our ability to truly adapt the technology and change our behavior and the way we do things, right? The real shocking stat, and I actually believe this, only 2% of organizations are seeing any kind of real return on using AI. So with all that being said, I think one of the really interesting stats that we've been capturing, we have this thing called the AI 44 index and works across US and Canada right now. And one of the things we've been tracking is we look at employees, if they think they're ready for AI. Like, again, it's very self-reported. And then we also do some testing on how proficient you are and things like that. How ready do you think you are? And it's like overwhelmingly people fall either into advanced or intermediate. Most fall into advanced, like 76% feel like they've been using it enough for the last year and a bit or whatever. Yeah. Interesting enough, when we ask them the same question, say like, how ready do you think your company is? It falls quickly to below 60%. So same question, just what do you think your company? And it's not because of policy, like governance. People are putting lots of governance in place. It's not because of technology. I mean, they're investing in the technology like crazy. It's not even because of training per se, although I would argue proficiency scores are pretty crappy right now, but it's not that. It's leadership. Most people inside the organization, they don't think the organization is ready because they don't know where the organization is going with AI. And it also doesn't help with all the fear mongering and things that are going on right now. And by the way, some of it is justifiable. You know, there's definitely job destruction going on for sure. But there's also a lot of job creation going on as well. And so people just don't know where it's going to go. So I would say the number one challenge that I'm seeing, yes, it's people's behavior, but it's a leadership challenge. People are just not being able to connect the dots.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think like when a lot of people started playing with AI and companies were trying to work out how to roll it out, they did see it as a tech thing and they just sort of tried to control it and tried to contain it, and they saw it as a risk. I guess they initially as a risk management thing, like we need to control this thing and contain this thing because who the hell knows what's going to happen if we release it. And then they started to do rollouts, but they did it in a way that obviously there was a lot of fear behind the way that it was rolled out and control still about how it was going to be rolled out, in that they didn't trust their people enough to know what to do with it. And so they tried to still build all of these boundaries around what you can and what you can't do. And you can have access to this thing, but not access to this thing. A lot of companies now are starting to clock that your people, as a leader, your job is to coach and get out of the way of your people because they're the ones who know what they're doing. And it's the same thing with AI, that if you just say, hey, you're really good at your job, here's another tool, find out the best way to use it. And we trust you and we're going to build safety around you, and we're going to build a psychologically safe environment and a risk, an openness kind of environment where you can kind of come and play with these things. And they're the companies that are now saying, they're seeing that kind of, the connections are being made, employees are kind of getting it, they're building it in a way that makes sense for them. And then that's having a huge impact on outcomes at the other end. And still, it's only just started to turn that dial. It's not, hey, everyone, here's this thing that you can't have access to now, to, hey, everyone, use it this way, to, hey, find the right way to work it for you. And that's what we find at TALY that works really well, is that AI is really good at taking a whole bunch of complex information and turning it into something really simple and contextual to you. And as soon as you try to generalize it and make it standardized, it just becomes really average and not very helpful. But if you can tailor it to who you are, then you get a really good outcome at the other end. And I think workplaces are kind of starting to clock that a little bit. The IKEA example, you mentioned, we were talking earlier about the IKEA example. Do you want to share that case study quickly?
Yeah. Well, I was actually just thinking, you brought up two really important things there. One is AI anxiety is a real thing, and we need to acknowledge it. I agree with everything you're saying around like give people sandboxes to play, give them some, like put some guardrails around it, right? Which again, that's what I'm saying. Policies aren't the problem. In fact, most people actually recognize and understand the policies to a degree. Not every company, but most people do recognize it. This whole thing of rewarding for the application, like rewarding people in a good thing. So it's creating a lot of anxiety, fear, ultimately, I think is probably the better way to put it. And then that trust thing you brought up, the sort of the mistrust that's going on is like, well, listen, every time I, check out my social feed, it's just a story about how, such and such company has laid off 10,000 people. Well, hey, most of those companies are tech companies doing it, and they're kind of right-sizing the companies. There's a lot of explanations of what's going on here too. And, lots of organizations like financial solutions are actually adding resources because they need people to be able to do this kind of stuff and understand what's going on. So this leads me back to this idea of like leadership, and it really them sort of stepping in and saying, okay, I have a strong direction of where this can go. So the IKEA example is a perfect one. So whereas a lot of companies are sitting there and saying, like, yes, I could reduce headcount by X and therefore save on the bottom line. Back in 2021, so this is before, ChatGPT even was a thing, but there was lots of retail chatbots being created. So IKEA jumped on that and said, okay, we're going to create something. So they created something called Billy, which is no surprise. And Billy was really designed to kind of, take some of the lift away from customer service reps, call center agents. Most things were pretty rudimentary tasks, right? So between 2021 when it was launched to 2023, so a couple of years there, and then obviously ChatGPT came live in 2022, I think it was. So in between that, things had changed quite a bit. But in between that time period, Billy had basically taken over about 47% of the tasks that those call center agents work. We're talking about 8,500 people within IKEA as well. So the leadership in IKEA had a decision to make. We got this thing at 47%. We can probably get it up to 70 or 80% pretty quickly, especially with generative AI now. So what do we do with these 8,500 people? Right. And they could have looked straight at the finances and said, we'll cut them in half. We're going to go right to the bottom line, save a bunch of money. But the leadership said, no, we're going to elevate these people. So they changed the dynamic, and they didn't use these words. These are my words. But instead of saying like, we're going to go through, workforce redesign or reimagine the workforce or whatever term, everybody knows what that means. When you start coming in with terms like that, it's layoffs, right? Everybody knows where that's headed, right? But they chose to elevate their humans into these new kind of positions. So again, if you read the kind of the media and stuff, they talk about it. All 8,500 people became interior designers. I'm sure that's not true, but they became some kind of consultants inside of the organization is what they became. So, and then they've tracked it since 2023 or whatever, since they decided to do that and elevate these people to these new positions. So, fast forward today, we're 2026. It added somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 to 1.4 billion to the top line of the business because of that. And again, these people were doing what they were naturally doing, what humans do really well. They were making connection. They were telling stories. They were selling stuff ultimately, but they were doing that stuff that it's just like AI is just not good at that yet, but it's just not good at that part of it. It was making those human connections, right? So that was a leadership decision that I wish more people would tell those stories instead of the stories that, whatever big tech company just laid off 10,000 people. Because, quite honestly, I get it. It's important. You got to tell both sides of the story, but I want to hear more of these good news stories that are going on.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think you're right that the media's got a big role to play in it. And we don't need to bang on about the media, but 1 in 5 Americans think that their job's going to be impacted by AI. Like they won't have a job in the future. And some of the statistics of the fear that's just sitting out there right now is pretty overwhelming. And, and that permeates into then how leaders respond, and how companies also respond. And if they think that, one of the challenges of leadership is that if you want to try to change someone's role and help to elevate them and to coach them, like we were talking about earlier, that's a lot of hard work. And that itself takes a lot of skill for the leaders to be able to actually action that. And even if the executive says, hey, we're going to turn all these people into interior designers, someone's got to work out a way to make that happen. And also the team have to come on that journey as well. And it becomes a whole, do we create agency? Do people step into the opportunity? Does everyone feel resistant to it? Do you have the company culture that's going to allow that to happen as well? IKEA is a progressive.
Values as a company.
Their values, yeah, exactly. And IKEA is probably naturally a pretty progressive company. And there's probably some out there that aren't as progressive as IKEA. Well.
To your point, I think one of the things I had read that one of the real challenges they had was, and you were sort of poking at it there, which I think is really, really important, especially when you're talking about like what TALY's role is in the market, is it wasn't so much that these people were naturally already dealing with customers. They knew how to deal with customers. They knew how to talk to them about whatever. Yeah, you don't want the blue, you want the red, or I'm dumbing this down a whole lot. I don't know what they talk to people about. But anyway, I'm not an interior design guy. But what was really the hard thing is how they upskilled them or elevated their behaviors and turned them into, quite honestly, leaders, right? And to some degree, better storytellers and those kinds of things, and better salespeople, and all those things that are uniquely human, right? So, and I can imagine that was a huge leadership challenge, right? So when you think of like TALY's capability, I mean, it's sort of like the right time and the right place for this, because we're going to need a whole lot more of this human elevation.
Yeah, great. I totally agree.
Yeah, I figured you would.
Yeah. So what are you seeing in the work that you're doing that are the leadership behaviors that are kind of rising to the surface and having the biggest impact? What are the characteristics of what a great leader right now looks like?
Yeah, I literally did not, use Claude or one of my favorite LLMs. This is something that I've been thinking about quite a bit. So, but it's going to sound very like AI created that. There's no way he created that. However, I am a world leader, so maybe I did think about this.
You might not even be real right now. I might just be talking to an AI.
That's possible. No, this is all the real deal. You can't make this up. So I've used this in other talks I've done as well. I think there's some unique things about humans that are really, really hard for AI to kind of replicate. And, you and I were talking about offline about this, these superpowers, if you will. And I really believe that we're entering the age of superhumans. But the three things are really there's this sensing, right? So the sensing is that leadership gap that I talk about, where it's where are we going? And there's a need inside of organizations, especially with AI, please tell us where we're going as it relates to AI, but other things as well. There's a real need for that. And the second thing is the storytelling element. And that's the ability to really, generate a narrative or create a narrative that you can get people to go along with you. Right? There is this art to storytelling, and you need to be able to convince people that your idea, your concept, your PowerPoint deck, whatever, is the right way to go. It's just, you're not going to be able to be sitting in behind the scenes in the future and data entering, right? You yourself have to be a leader in terms of being able to sort of convince people. So that storytelling thing, and I know it gets talked about ad nauseum, but I think it's such an important thing. And the last thing, probably related a little bit to the sensing, or then storytelling as well, but it's the steering element, right? That's the art of leadership, right? Being able to actually truly lead people in that direction. So sensing where that direction is going to go, storytelling to convince them to go there, or giving them a narrative that makes sense. This is where we should go. And then being able to steer them, navigate to that destination as well. And because it's never a straight line anywhere, as you and I both know, being entrepreneurs, right? So I think those are the three big attributes that leaders need to really be able to hone in on. What are you seeing in people's CVs or resumes these days, particularly young people? And I said, it's not so much what I'm seeing, it's what I want to see. And it's oh yeah, you want to see they've got ChatGPT and stuff. I said, no, I want to see that they've built tools, they've created things, they've vibe coded applications to make them more effective people. Those are building superpowers, right? And I think if people could have that mindset and go, wow, you know what? this could really elevate me to the next level, allow me to do things. IKEA was a great example of that. Find the bolt, let it do that stuff all day long, but
Yeah.
elevate me to do these other things.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice framework. And it was nice of Claude to come up with 3 words starting with S for you that kind of sounded good. No, I'm sure it was all your work. But I think what's interesting in that whole context is that with some of the tools, if you think about it in the right way, it creates a level playing field for everyone. And if you think about things like storytelling, for example, traditionally that would have been that charismatic leader, and then all of those archetypes that go behind that, white man, tall, like all of those, traditional things of what a good leader looks like. And, and the data has proven for a really long time that there's bias in assuming that those people can do leadership and other people can't do leadership. Now we kind of know that, introverts can be great leaders, extroverts can be great leaders, people who are more conservative can be great leaders, people who are really open and curious can be great leaders. We sort of have these tools at our disposal now where whoever you are, you can shape what your superhero looks like, and it doesn't have to be what it used to be. And, exactly like you said, when you put up Welcome to the Age of Superheroes, everyone thinks about, some dude in a cape, where it's actually now you've got the tools at your disposal to work out what your actual superpower is, and you can amplify that in a way that works for you in a really personalized way as well. It sort of just really changes all of that history and all of those traditions to.
I know you're asking me questions, but can I ask you a question? I'd be interested to hear what your perspective is. Like, are people really struggling with how to think about creating my own superpower, right? Because I don't know what my one thing is personality and profiles and those kinds of things. They always kind of tease. I always loved, I've talked to this in the past, but I did DISC years ago. We've actually incorporated in one of the companies that I ran a long time ago. And we had consultants in there and stuff. And we get into later on some of the challenges we had with it. But so we had all these people running around doing all this stuff. But it was interesting. So I was like innovator and a D, which was no kidding. And then the dynamic of the company was there was only a few I's, a few D's, but a lot of S's and C's. We were way more. So, how do we even things out? How do we become more innovative? How do we do all these kinds of things? Right. But I didn't really, honestly, if you were to ask me, Steve, do you think you're an innovator? I wouldn't have really categorized myself as that, even though I had it in my job title. But I really never kind of thought of myself as truly that role. And as it described it, I'm like, yeah, and I've done lots of these in the past too. And it's, usually those are the attributes, but it's interesting. I find it's really hard for people to identify what their superpower is. I don't know if you're seeing the same thing or if you've seen the same thing or.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of complexity behind that. I think one of the main things is that in workplaces for a really long time, people were identified by their role, not by who they were as a human. And so, you had to sit doing this thing, and that was the thing that identified you. And you weren't really allowed to bring your person into that role. And you had to fit into the corporate environment. You had to align with the corporate values. You had to fit in. And even though that has probably been changing for quite some time now, cultures are really slowly moving creatures and they don't change very quickly. And so for people to, even though a lot of people have had permission to be themselves, to step into opportunity, to take chances, there's still a lot of am I really allowed to? Is my manager going to say, get back down there and start, putting that data back into that? So there's a lot of fear that sits behind that. I had a really great example yesterday. We ran an innovation workshop with the team. And as you know, innovation isn't like a thing, it's a process. And it goes from identifying a problem to implementing it, to rolling it out, to getting feedback. And there's actually a role across innovation for everyone and every type of personality. But if you say, hey, we're going to do an innovation session, a whole bunch of people say, I'm not innovative. I'm not creative. I can't come up with ideas. And they instantly come in with these assumptions of what a good innovator looks like and what a bad innovator looks like. And so what we got everyone to do was they jumped into Ask TALY and they explored their own personality before coming along to the session. And they said, it's a role that I can play in innovation based on my personality. And they got, some really interesting insights. Said, you're going to be great at critiquing, you're going to be great at risk management, you're going to be great at. And so then when everyone turned up, they went, actually, I do belong in this room and I have something to contribute. And, and so then for us to talking about innovation, we said, well, great innovation comes from a whole bunch of diverse personalities working well together to develop ideas, everyone kind of felt confident that they actually had something to contribute. And we got to, when you run those workshops and you get to maybe level 3, you sort of just introducing ideas and
Yeah.
getting people to think about it. I reckon we got to like level 7 or 8 because they were like, they got it.
Oh,
They were ready to learn. They understood the team dynamics and their personal contribution to that as well. And that's the thing that changes. So I think corporate structures have been for a really long time rigid and designed that way for a reason. Humans aren't rigid. And they're sort of starting to now work out that they can sort of squeeze into the cracks and do things a little bit differently. But those things move really slowly.
well,
And AI is moving really fast. So
yeah. And I mean, those things, to your point, don't necessarily align. But one of the things that I've been sort of on about a bit, maybe I'll socialize it with you right now, but it's like, do roles really matter? Right. So in organizations where like, outcomes matter, right? And you think about it, like AI is a fantastic, and call it a tool, however you want to define it right now. But I have my own sort of thoughts of what it ends up becoming. I don't necessarily know if it's like a person in org. Like I hate these. I've seen org charts where like these agents are working side. Like, yeah, I get it, but it's not. And HR people are trying to like figure out how we, manage, agents plus manage people. I don't know. I find all that a bit sort of much. I don't necessarily see it sort of rolling out exactly like that. But I do wonder whether or not it doesn't become roles and it becomes more responsibilities and outcomes, right? So it's very much so like, and again, you and I both know, like, sort of in the past, like titles mattered, right? Like, I mean, I've managed enough people in the past where for a while, I didn't care. I told my business partner, like, take my title off the card. I don't care about titles, but that was easy for me to say because like I was part owner of the company and, eventually went and sold the company and became a chief product. It was easy for me to say that because I had the authority and sort of the executive responsibilities. But other people in the organization is like, no, I need my, senior director on my card because that's how I get identified. That's how I'm known, right? Or even when you used to go to parties, it was people would always ask, like, what do you do? Right. So nobody says like, what outcomes did you produce today? Like it just, so, but I do wonder whether or not roles start to really sort of disintegrate in the future and whether they actually matter.
yeah, it's an interesting question. And it is definitely changing with Gen Z. The values aren't about achievement and status as much anymore. It's more about contribution to community, social, your internal values, those kind of things are starting to come out as well. And so, potentially that is going to change in the future, but who knows? So where does it all end up? I guess is the last question. Are we going to see, like, over the next couple of years, are we going to see these things kicking in? Is AI going to be the huge disruption that we think it's going to be? Like, what's your big prognosis about 10 years from now?
Yeah, I hate these prediction things because, something will end up coming in and sort of superseding all of this, and it'll be something that will come out of left field. And even though AI was being evolved for, decades and decades and decades, it just, really was, sort of like, look at this, you can create this little chat thing and it can think for you. And all of a sudden we get to 100 million users in 3 weeks sort of thing. Like it was just, again, the accessibility of this thing is just, it's just off the charts, right? So I do think, though, you and I talked about this a little bit as well. I do think you're going to see this rise of entrepreneurs that I think it's going to be this explosion. I've said many times in the past, I think the whole creator economy, which is really entrepreneurs, was really kind of built on the back of really YouTube as a platform, but also like TikTok and these other Instagram, other platforms as well, that created this creator economy that's, like people unbox things and they're making $1 million a month. And it's actually incredibly interesting watching someone unbox. It's like, it actually, I guess there's a real art to it, but, and just like podcasting and things like that has just obviously exploded as well. So the creator economy has been, really interesting from a sort of economic engine and giving people real opportunities. And some of these like creators as well and influencers, like I've never heard of them before, but it doesn't matter because they've got 100 million followers that matter to them, right? But I don't know who these people are. But so it's a very different sort of world that's happening. I do think this is going to happen, and call it the software creator community or whatever you want to call it. But I do see that eclipsing the creator economy. And maybe it's just all going to be one and the same. But this is something where I don't think I've gone to an organization, particularly the young people, where if they've got not someone who's got like a carrot and stick in front of these people, but they're actually rewarding people for outcomes or reporting people for, adaptive behavior, right? So I heard a story today where an organization, probably about 3 or 4,000 people, very large company in the healthcare space, the CEO in a big town hall called up 4 people up on the stage during this town hall. And this was just recently, and handed each one of them $50,000 checks. And because they had on their own vibe coded things, solved problems within the guidelines of what was going on. But because the rest of the organization just wasn't kind of getting this whole thing, and they didn't have restrictive policies, obviously it's like, don't be uploading client data. Like they did have some things around it, but that was an example of rewarding people, probably over rewarding, but rewarding people for outcomes and applications and applying those things. And so again, those 4 people were probably super inspired and probably mini entrepreneurs themselves, right? So I do think you're going to see a lot more of that. I think you're going to see a lot more of the example. It was funny you say the Gen Z. I really feel confident. I know a lot of people are very concerned about the youth, and I think we're all concerned just because of kind of where things are at in the state of the world, and all legitimate things. And I think we've had many states in history like this that have probably been worse in many times as well. But I think we are in incredibly good hands with the youth right now. I think they're smart. I think they're driven. I think they're people that are not afraid to be, as you put it, like innovative and get out there and do things. And I do feel like there's a real entrepreneurial spirit that's sort of bubbling up where it's like, I can do this. I think we're seeing a generation where it's like, I can fix that problem. And it's not our parents' problem. It's my problem now, and I need to fix that problem. I feel like that's the generation we're seeing sort of come up. And I think AI is going to be a massive foundation, just like you and I built on top of HTML, right? Like, I know that sounds so archaic, but we built on top of the internet. They're now, and by the way, AI is a step change that's, far going to exceed the internet. Yes. But we built things on top of that. They're going to build things that we could have never imagined. So I think 10 years from now, we're going to see things that we're like, we're going to look back at this and go, remember when? And it's like, no, because my hearing aid will fall out.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to frame it, though, the creator economy and how it really comes down to the distribution of access. Like if you think about the YouTube people, there were 4 channels on television and now there's 17 billion channels on YouTube. So because people had access to it. And same with Etsy, every designer could now sell things, whereas you didn't just have to go to Walmart to buy things. So it's sort of all of that distribution and access changes. And now we're saying, well, everyone's got access and distribution to technology and to building things and to, that last barrier of cost has gone and you can just do whatever you want. So the question
that's another conversation. If you start talking to people about usage on tokens and things like that, like I think, the model around subscription or usage or whatever, like there's definitely some kinks in the armor on that one. That we'll work through that. I mean, that's not to your point, it shouldn't be a barrier.
You can have a $200 subscription to Claude and you could vibe code a whole app in a weekend. Like that's exactly. Better than $500,000 engineering team that you used to have to pay for. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think the challenge is, and I know we don't want to go into trouble, but I think the challenge is like you can create it, but then when you put it in a market and it's getting used and every time it's getting pinged, all of a sudden it's, it's ramping up the costs very quickly, right? So I think that's one thing that I'm not sure everybody sort of saw, or it's like, you know what, we're seeing a lot of progress inside the organization and letting our developers use whatever, name your favorite coding program or vibe coding program. And so they're like, well, just give more of them access to this and, or even rudimentary tasks that people are doing or administrative tasks, will give more access. And next thing you know, you get this $50 million bill from, I mean, that's a bit extreme, but it is, I've heard this from a number of organizations where it is becoming a bit of a CFO nightmare because they're like, who authorized this? And by the way, how are we justifying the ROI on this as well? So, which is a whole other struggle that people are.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, we should leave it there. Thank you for taking the time. It's a really interesting chat. I feel like we could talk about this for 17 days. So it's been a very interesting chat. Thanks for taking the time to say hi.
Pete, thank you very much. Always enjoy talking.